All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting of the TRPA Operations and Governments Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, June 28th, 2023, and the time is a little after 8:15 in the morning. First item on the agenda is the roll call to determine a quorum. Maria?
Ms. Aldine.
Here.
Mr. DeCara.
Here.
Ms. Dis. Mr. Honigman.
Here.
Ms. Lane. Here. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I will now go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely to observe the meeting, please go to trpa.gov under the calendar header. Click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for June 28th, 2023. There you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address the committee directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking Raise Hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. Your raised hand will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you have used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. To remote committee members, and I guess we have no members of the committee. I see that Wes is joining us remotely, but members of the committee are quorum is present in person. So we will bypass that item and move on to basically a reminder that well, I guess we'll just we'll bypass that entirely. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment and will be called on to the front to speak. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak directly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Chris, any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Thank you. Then we'll deem the agenda approved as posted. Next item on the agenda, we have no minutes. Minutes from the May 24th meeting will be in the July 26th packet. So there will be no action on this item. That brings us to agenda item number 3, which is a recommendation to approve the May financials. Information on this item can be found on page 41 of your packet. Chris.
Okay, for the record, Chris Tyler, Finance Director for the agency. If I could have the first chart, please. We're getting towards the end of the year now. We've got 11 out of 12 months in the bag. Looking forward, I'm guessing at this point, I'm estimating that we're probably going to underrun our labor costs by about 100,000 for the year. So there'll be a little bit of a surplus there. Contracts is a lot harder to track because so many of them get billed late, and we'll be paying invoices on our contracts through August, sometimes even September, particularly with the universities and some of the other institutions that are slow to build. On the revenue side, there's one red flag, and that is we normally budget for about $150,000 a year in settlements, and that bounces up and down from year to year. It's good for an overall average, but this happens to be a year where we haven't had very many. And since there's an illegal committee this month, we're not going to have any more. We do book those when we actually get the money from the applicant or from the applicant. Yes. And then final comment is we spent about half of the $500,000 worth of bond money for building maintenance, long-term maintenance and stuff like that. So we've done this remodel, we've done the roof. The 2 remaining items that will consume the balance of that are parking lot overlay and restriping and the retaining wall up front. The parking lot, we ran an RFP. We're ready to go ahead to contract and get that done. We're still working with contractors on the retaining wall. We think maybe we can get that back to a reasonable number, but it's not a done deal yet. And at the end of the day, what we need is an engineer is going to have to sign off on the design, and Douglas County will have to permit. Without that, we can't really proceed. So I'm holding off on that, and I'm beginning to think that maybe that's not going to be able to be done this year because we're already well into building season. And obviously we've got the end of grading season 3 months away, 4 months away. So it may be difficult. And just in general, in the basin, people are still reporting difficulties in getting contractors and fitting into people's schedule. Everybody's booked. That's the current problem, is they can't find an engineer who has the time to sit down and do the drawings right now. So that's kind of the overview. If I can have the next chart, please. This is the totals, the numbers. The planning fees I've talked about have been low the last 4 or 5 months. But we're starting to peel back the onion and looking at this, and we'll talk more about it when we get to the budget conversation. But we're looking at trends going the other way, saying these are going to be popping back up. And by trends, what I mean is We're seeing more pre-app stuff. People are coming in for pre-application meetings. They're doing land capability stuff. It's all the things that we see prior to people submitting permits. So we will miss that budget number for this year, but we're more positive and optimistic about next year. And like I said, we'll talk about that when we get to the budget conversation, which is a couple items from now. If I have the next chart, please. This is just the same numbers, only against budget. Nothing really unusual there. And then if you go to the next chart, cash flow, that's our typical cash flow trend where we get the influx of state monies at the beginning of the year and then we spend it down towards the end of the year. Right now, on a year-to-date basis, we're positive 600K on cash flow, and we'll probably go negative by the end of the year. But that's mainly due to the disbursements of the excess coverage money to NDSL. So that was money in the bank, so it's not an operational issue at all. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Chris, I consider this a success for TRPA that our settlement revenues are down because people are complying with the rules. So that's a good thing, but I'm just wondering whether or not we should just include those as whether we should include settlement amounts in our budget, whether we should just treat that as something that's serendipitous. If we get the money, we get the money, but obviously that's a huge uncertainty.
This is probably the lowest it's been since I've been here, so it's very unusual that it is this low. But we have been using that money to make sure that we get a balanced budget, things like that. So we do have some reserves, so if we run low, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
So,
But we're being relatively circumspect. I'm assuming we'll be relatively circumspect,
Yeah.
given what might be a trend in terms of what we include in the budget
Madam Chair,
for 2024.
Sure.
Yes, James.
I had a question in that regards. What percentage of the budget of TRPA compiles from settlements, and also what percentage compiles from fines? Just out of curiosity.
I'm not going to be able to perfectly answer that question because we kind of distinguish between two things. The settlement would be when somebody, we take a pretty the whole way to the board and all that. Oftentimes we'll reach an agreement with the applicant offline and it'll be in a mutual agreement. And when we do that, what we do is we assess something called double planning fee. And that appears in a different part of the budget. And I can't just pull that from scratch. Overall, our standard estimate for settlements for the year is $150,000. And our TRPA total budget for the year this year is 19 million.
Okay, so it's a
an
small part.
inconsequential.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was my question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. All right. Yes, Vince.
I was just curious with the permitting, the permits down this year compared to past years. I noticed that we still I think it's in the Tahoe in depth where it shows the length of time permits have been open. And we had, I think 17% had been open more than 120 days. If we're going to be able to dent that, or if those, I guess I'm not sure why they're over 120 days. I imagine it's, those are really complex and there's issues working with people, but just wondering if we're catching up on things and able to get ahead of it right now during the slower period.
First of all, permits aren't necessarily down. They were still high the first 6 months of the year. They're down relative to the last 5 months of the year. I was under the impression that they'd hit their 3120 marker, but I don't know if that data in Tahoe in depth includes basically those permits that are in a state of suspension or something like that.
I'll jump in. Good morning, everyone. Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. A couple things. To Chris's point, we think the weather had a huge effect on the revenues because of the excessive winter, and a lot of things just slowed down. Field work could in a light winter that preparation work really starts in spring. Well, that was impossible. So I do feel like we've lived through this many times in big winters, and it does catch up. On the Tahoe report that's in the packet, when John Hester gets in, we'll take a look at that, Vince. But typically those are really complicated projects, shoreline projects. And you'll recall that we actually added staff to the shoreline review. We vetted this at this committee, Madam Chair. We had a lot of very complicated projects in the queue. We did not have enough resources to address it. So we've been catching up on that, but we've actually been making a lot of great progress. So there probably are some complicated ones, and part of our additional restructure in the last couple of months also pulled more resources into the planning and compliance team. And so like Jen Self, for example, was in long range planning. She's been moved over to permitting compliance to address some of those languishing permits in shoreline and in other manners of assistance. So, but we can tease out those particulars and get back to you.
Yeah, that would be great. I noticed that in the report, and I want to thank staff and John Hester in particular because I know that we were doing, providing this information on a fairly frequent basis. And then we decided that perhaps people weren't interested or was just too time consuming to compile the information. But there is one outlier in the report in our packet of projects that are over 120 days. And one is a residential dwelling unit. All of the others are shoreline related, which is not unexpected. So maybe John can just provide us with some details about that particular project.
You bet, we'll do that.
That would be great. And thank you again for all your hard work for including that information in the packet on a monthly basis. Okay. So Chris, you're finished with your report. Okay. All right. Any other members from the committee regarding the May financials? Okay. In that case, we will now go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the Operations and Governance Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. I don't see anyone in the audience. So Maria, who's managing public comment for us? Okay.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to make public comment on this item.
Thank you. Then we will close public comment. And if there are no further comments from the committee, I'll entertain a motion to recommend to the governing board approval of the May financials.
So moved.
We have a motion. Thank you very much. Any comments on the question? All right, seeing none. Mari, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeCara.
Aye.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Ms. Dis, Ms. Lane,
Yes.
and Ms. Aldine.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Right, thank you. That brings us to agenda item number 4, which is a recommendation to approve the release, excuse me, of City of South Lake Tahoe operations and maintenance mitigation funds in the amount of $25,000 for the League to Save Lake Tahoe's microplastics beach cleanup project. Information on this item can be found on page 59 of your packet. Tracy, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Tracy Campbell, Executive Assistant with the EIP Department here at TRPA, with an ask from the City of South Lake Tahoe requesting approval of the release of $25,000 in operations and maintenance mitigation funds towards the microplastic beach cleanup project. That's the first time I've said that without stumbling. The project proposes the use of innovative technology. It's the EcoClean bot, otherwise known as the B-bot, Beachcomber, to safely remove microplastics and other trash from Lake Tahoe beaches. So in this case, it'll be specifically City of South Lake Tahoe beaches. They'll be working in partnership with the League to Save Lake Tahoe, who are providing the matching funds. As you know, O&M funds do require one-to-one local match, so that will be covered by the League. And the League have worked pretty closely with the team. They did some extensive testing and piloting last year, which was proved to be really effective. So we're joined, got another couple of pictures because I think it's kind of cool. And we're joined online by Laura Patton, who's a senior policy analyst with the League, and she can answer any specific questions if you have them.
Pardon me. Good morning. Does any member of the committee have any questions regarding this item? I've seen a video of the operation of the B-bot. It's really quite interesting. I guess the only question I had, and it's really not for Laura. Laura, I thank you for being here this morning. There's no problem from an administrative standpoint by releasing these funds directly to the League as opposed to the City of South Lake Tahoe.
Chris Crowther for the record, Finance Director. We haven't really done this in the past, but I just said, well, as long as the city is telling us specifically directing us to release the funds directly to the League, that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
Because it's the city controls these monies as it is, we're using them on their behalf. Mine, I'd cut the middleman out and just write the check.
Okay, all right. Well, that sounds like an expedient way of doing things. And I want to thank the league, Laura, for stepping up and providing the matching funding necessary to finance the use of the BBOT. For purpose of disclosure, I would like to note that I participated in a Zoom meeting recently with members of the league board at which the use of this particular piece of technology was discussed. So. Gabriel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Will there be, I not to assume, but I imagine the answer is yes. Will there be some kind of post cleanup data that's distributed to this board regarding, what's found and what's picked up? I know that there was legislation around microplastics in Nevada that did not move forward, but I imagine that data points would be very useful as we look at dealing with this issue. Thank you.
I know that if you look on the screen, this is kind of there was a Glenbrook beach cleanup that took place last year, and that's kind of a prototypical example of some of the items that were retrieved. So it would be useful to know if we're making progress in terms of advising the public of the need to keep the beaches clean. So I think that would be certainly appropriate. So and I'm assuming that the league will be collecting that data on our behalf. So Laura, if you could make sure that at the end of the season, a report is submitted. And I presume that consistent with the contract, some sort of feedback is ordinarily received at the conclusion of a project like this. Is that going to be an issue for you?
That is correct, that we will be compiling all of the data and have a report that will be made available. Currently, we have created a story map from all of our 2022 data that you are also welcome to view, and I'm happy to provide that information as well. But we will have a report and data regarding all of the material that we're planning to collect on an annual basis.
That would be great. What beaches specifically in South Lake Tahoe will the BBOT be used on? Do you know?
We haven't determined which beach at this time. We wanted to make sure that we get approval with the hope that we could coordinate utilizing this on a city beach in coordination with the city for the 5th of July when we have a lot of material and we do a person kind of versus robot cleanup as well.
Okay. So it's man versus machine. All right. Okay, that's exciting.
Hey, Shelley, I had a
Yes, Vince.
quick question. Is the ultimate goal to figure out if this works and then expand it around the lake, I would assume? Are we going to have a lot of BBOTs working, on all our beaches or?
Well, I think to a certain extent depends on funding, because obviously, $50,000 is being allocated to a single beach cleanup this season. So, or possibly more. I don't know. Laura, do you know, depending on the size of the beach and the amount of material collected, is it possible that more than one beach will be included in the program this year?
Yeah, so in this particular ask, we would like to clean up the beach kind of in the near term and then do an end of season cleanup with the BBOT of a whole beach. And last year we collected a lot of data from utilizing the machine on smaller parcels and actually found that up to 10 times the amount of litter items were removed by BBOT versus in-person kind of cleanups because it goes 4 inches under the sand. But the idea is that we can have this technology utilized on different beaches and collect that data and hopefully in the future be able to deploy that in other areas. And you're correct that that will be funding contingent.
Okay, that's great. I personally would love to see the data that was collected last year. And I don't know if anybody else in the committee would be interested in receiving a copy of that. Maybe you can just work through TRPA staff and they can forward it on to us. Terrific. Thank you, Laura. Okay. Any other questions or comments by members of the committee? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Any member in the audience wishing to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll move on to members of the public who may be joining us virtually. Maria?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to make public comment.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll close public comment. If there are no further comments or questions by the committee, I'll entertain a motion to recommend the governing board approve the release of $25,000 subject to the conditions contained in this memorandum.
So moved.
We have a motion. Any comments on the question? Seeing none, Maria, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Ms. Dis, Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Aldine.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to the next item, agenda number 5, which is a briefing on fiscal year 2023, 2024 annual budget. This is an informational item only, and no committee action will be taken. Chris?
For the record, Chris Schuyler, Finance Director. We just comment on the prior item on July 5th. There's a lot of people going to be out there cleaning up the beach, including TRPA staffers. If they would like to join us, I think Jeff Cowan is running that.
5th is my birthday. I'm not sure I want to spend it cleaning up a beach.
One particular beach, which I think.
They do either. Is it Nevada Beach or?
Nevada Beach usually.
Yeah.
But there's all the beaches. Right, have cleanup. They're sponsored by different organizations. So the one that they're talking about is specifically the TRPA one, but
Is
I know
it,
US Bank always does Timber Cove, and et cetera.
So we have,
there's a great deal of trash to be picked up on the 5th. So
we have an adopt a beach program. Is that the?
Yeah.
Okay, that's,
obviously, this is normally the month where we bring you the budget. We're still working out some final details and things like that. So we wanted to wait until next month to do the full details. But we're pretty far along. So I wanted to show you where we are and to get some of the initial conversations underway. These are rough numbers. We'll show you the final numbers next month. This is a pretty good representation of where we are. If anything, the grant numbers may increase. We're still working through some issues there. Excuse me. Main thing to call your attention to on here is our current year budget is for $19 million. This budget for next year is going to be 27 million, a substantial increase. I think when I joined the agency 12 years ago, our budgets were around 12 to $13 million. The biggest impacts in here are the LTRA grants and this agreement we have with the Forest Service Lake Tahoe Basic Management Unit to handle about $5 million a year with the grants from them. But there is an increase, a substantial increase in funding from the state of Nevada. We had a good session. They are back up to the 2/3, 1/3 share. And actually with some of the special allotments, they may slightly exceed that because of the issues in California. Late breaking news. I've heard last night that I believe California has a deal on the budget. The numbers I saw were only on the general fund, so I'll have to wait and make sure that our portion, which isn't in general fund, it's in special funds, is still there, but we weren't expecting any changes to ours. But there does appear to be an agreement on budget. On this chart, I kind of broke the general fund out into two pieces. The top piece is kind of what we want to be balanced at a zero balance. But there's some other items in there that would cause us to show a negative in terms of revenues versus expenses, but they really aren't operationally a negative. The first one is the shoreline fund. We still have some reserves in that shoreline fund, really dating back to the original shoreline program in 2007. So the fact that our expenses are going to slightly exceed the revenue in the shoreline fund isn't really a big deal. We'll spend down those reserves. And it does not make sense to move money from the general fund over into the shoreline fund when they have a reserve. The costs are rising a little bit there, and we don't need to raise buoy fees too. We're going to do that in the immediate future. We are looking to spend more effort now on enforcement now that we're through permitting most of the existing buoys and piers and things like that. So we're starting to ramp up the enforcement side, and that's in this budget. The other thing on here is the bond money that I was talking about earlier. We started out with 500,000. We basically spent 250, and we got 250 left to go. That's in the bank, so it's coming from the bonds, not from revenues. So it'll show us a deficit on our financial statements, but it's not really a deficit. TSAC is balanced because the Science Advisory Council is we're like a grant, so we're just reimbursed for all those costs. So that's not a big deal. And then you can see on the grant side, you see the big increases are in AIS and EIP, And that's the LTRA funding flowing in. So that's the only number chart this month. So next month I'll bury you with the numbers. To get to sign kind of the key pieces, thank you. I think we're about 90% there in terms of getting the budget together. So we're just nailing down the final details. It balances except for those two items I called out, the shoreline fund and the bond money. This does fund the work plan. We're working on both at the same time. We'll bring both to you next month. And I'll just kind of talk generally that there's a little bit more of a focus, I think, with Julie's leadership in making sure that we're working on staff retention and making sure that we're doing right for our staff. And that's in there, which I will get to in just a second. If we can go forward to the next chart, please. For some key revenue assumptions. State funding is basically all known at this point. The Nevada budget's closed. California, I'll have to check the special fund, but I'm sure that's fine. The only a bit of an outlier on there is we were told that we have an opportunity to go back this fall to ask for some more money for staff salary increases. It kind of got shoved out of the way in the regular budget because their deficit against the general fund was so enormous. They just didn't have time to talk to anybody about anything else. So basically they shut down any efforts to talk about the environmental license plate fund. So we will go back. I'm not expecting a lot from them, not as much as we got from California or from Nevada, because California just isn't giving the same raises that Nevada's giving out. But we'll go back to them in the fall.
So Chris, no concerns about, in view of the financial situation in California, you don't think it's likely that these special funds will be rated?
If they have an agreement on the general fund, then I think the answer is no, they won't be rated.
Well, maybe that's why they have an agreement on the general fund.
We'll have to parse through that, but we haven't seen any indications that they're doing that. So in this case, we're healthy because we were below. Our strategy this year was to stay below the radar, stay out of the line of sight. And it worked. I'm confident it worked. Having said that, the environmental license plate fund is relatively healthy. We can't load it up with a bunch of stuff, but it's good. And that's true for some of the other special funds, like the TSAC fund is there. Okay. On the planning side is the other key assumption, and this is a repeat of what I was talking about earlier. There will be a surge there from shoreline permits. And then again, just to remind everybody, your annual buoy fee goes to the shoreline fee, but when you apply for a new buoy or a new structure, that's a planning action. So it goes into the planning funds. We do the lottery every other year, and this is a lottery year. So we're expecting to see a substantial number of applications for piers and buoys in there, to the tune of like $300,000 plus. We did include an inflation adjustment as we've been doing annually. 6.4% was the inflation number when we started the budget process a couple of years ago. We'll revisit that, probably come back to you, I think in October is the normal time when we review the inflation adjustment to the planning fees. Just a heads up, we are thinking about moving that up, and maybe that can be combined with the overall just budget approval process that we go through. And then finally, and this is the upside that's not really baked in there that makes us more confident about being a little bit higher on the planning fees, is we're seeing a lot of activity on some major projects. Homewood, with or without a master plan revision, Homewood's going to be filing applications for the individual components of their project. We're starting to see signs of life in some other areas too. Calneva, Boatworks even is starting to talk to us again. So some major projects are in sight. Let's see how it goes. But it's definitely upside potential here. And then, as I indicated earlier, we're seeing all the positive indicators on the types of applications we're getting now being pre-permitting type applications. So those are the kind of the two a little bit aggressive assumptions, but I think they're perfectly reasonable.
Okay, well, we can always make a course correction if we have to, right?
On the expenditure side, we're proposing a 5% salary increase for staff. That will not be peanut buttered. We don't do that. It'll be based on a combination of factors, including performance and where people are paid within their salary ranges.
Peanut butter?
It won't be spread evenly.
Oh, okay. All right. I haven't.
Okay. It's not 5% for everybody. It will vary.
Okay, that's an accounting term. Yeah, okay.
There are new positions in this budget. For years now, your legal committee has been berating us for getting by with one lawyer.
He's
So-
always been more than adequate. I don't see the need for an additional attorney.
Okay, I'll take it out of the budget. That'll save us a lot of money. So we are talking about adding an attorney. The front door is actually unlocked, but we haven't really publicized it yet, but we need to get that out. We're gonna do a whole thing. And we'll have to have a receptionist there, so to handle the walk-in stuff. And then we'll be adding 2 planners. Both of these will be in what we used to call long range area. One is going to be covered by a grant, and the other one is actually going to be backfill for some time. The other people will be spending on the grant. So, sure.
Madam Chair, if I may, Julie Reagan, Director. Just in terms of the positions, I wanted to provide even a little more context. You know, in my one-on-one conversations with every staff member, I'm compiling that as part of our presentation for the work plan and budget for next month. But my overall assessment in working with our executive team and our operations group managers is that, you know, we are understaffed. When I started at TRPA, we were essentially around 90 in terms of our headcount, with seasonal employees up to 100 in some years, you know, about 15 years ago. And during the Great Recession, we cut a lot of staff. We've had reductions in forces over the years, and we've never really right-sized the workforce for the volume of work that we have. We didn't really cut out any work. We've grown in the demands. The compact gives us a lot of responsibility. So we could easily include, you know, new compliance officers and additional staff on the administrative side. But what we've tried to do, because we didn't really get enough new revenue to cover those, we are prioritizing these 4 new positions. And the attorney position is something we've talked about for years, that's really necessary. And we want to launch a new public service program that's very apparent to the community right now. We have a temporary employee that's staffing the front lobby area, and we want that position to be permanent. And we want to make a splash with our community to invite folks to come in and still utilize the online permitting that we've so successfully implemented, because it's successful, but really make it a different kind of experience at the agency. And so that we formed a new customer service team as part of our organizational shifts. And then we'll be soon announcing an exciting new grant from the state of California that will support all the housing work that the board has directed us to do to modernize our land use policies. And that's going to require a lot more regional planning, long range, thoughtful planning work. And so we'll talk more about that next month. And I wanted to thank this committee and the board for being flexible to have us bring this forward. We really needed the extra time to work with individual teams that have shifted in the last 6 months and make sure that everyone's, you know, in alignment and thoroughly in communication on the work plan, which informs the budget. So appreciate this committee's support to do that next month. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. Chris, does that conclude your report?
Yeah, at this point, this is an information item. So what I tried to present to you today is the kind of the critical assumptions that are going in there that make the biggest difference in doing the budget. So any feedback you might have in terms of whether or not you find these assumptions to be reasonable and acceptable. Other than that, that's all.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any comments or questions by members of the committee? All right, seeing none, I think well, Chris, I think by and large, you plan, always have planned a relatively conservative budget. I mean, it's better to not anticipate receiving revenues and then be surprised by the uptick, in revenues coming into the general fund. So, or into the special funds for that matter. So I have no questions, although it would be helpful. Could you send your PowerPoint presentation to the members of the committee in preparation for next month's discussion?
Certainly. Apologize. I
great.
was supposed to do that this time.
Okay,
That's right.
that's all right. No worries. All right. Since we have no comments or questions from the committee, we will now move on to public comment. If any member of the public wishes to address the Operations and Governance Committee on this agenda item, again, it's a non-action item. Please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Any member of the public in the audience wishing to comment on the presentation just concluded by Chris? All right, seeing none. Maria, anyone online wishing to comment?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to make public comment.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go ahead and close public comment and we'll look forward to a robust discussion next month on the 2024 budget. That brings us to agenda item number 6, which is a recommendation to approve the delegation of authority to the executive director to enter into contracts prior to approving the fiscal year 2024 TRPA budget. Information on this item can be found on page 65 of your packet, Chris.
Again, for the record, Chris Kyler, Finance Director. The one downside to waiting is we don't have a budget at the beginning of the fiscal year. So this is kind of an administrative matter to delegate to Julie the authority to go ahead and execute on those contracts that we need to execute on before the actual approval of the budget next month. It's kind of a scheduling thing. We have a lot of activity this time of year because this time of year when most things happen on the basin because of the summer and scheduling that. We proposed in the staff summary that Julie be delegated the authority to enter into contracts up to 10% of last year's budget. I went out and I asked the department managers, what do you need us to approve between now and the beginning of July budget? And sorry, if you could skip forward. Next chart, please. And the chart after that. This is what they came up with, which is a total of about $3 million, which is considerably more than that 10%. What I've tried to break out on this chart is you can see that the bulk of these contracts are actually going to be written against grants or against existing funding sources. So the first 2 bullets up there, the reimbursement and the TSAC, are both grant type things. The Shoreline Fund, again, has its own funding mechanism and the bond money is already in the bank. Of these 3 million in contracts, there's only about 650,000 that are actually coming out of the general fund. So what I'm wondering, what I'd like to propose is that we modify the staff recommendation, say that Julie would be authorized to approve contracts up to a total of 1 million out of the general fund, plus any contract that's funded by outside sources. I don't know if anybody wants to edit my wording on that to make it right.
Quick question, Madam Chair. Would that provision be moving forward for all contracts, or would that just be for this budget year?
It's basically just for the next 30 days.
Thank you.
We're not proposing a change in policy, a permanent change in policy.
So just the background is usually you approve those contracts through the budget process. So we're a month off. So we need authorization for Julie to enter into any contracts over the next 30 days while the budget is finalized and then presented to you.
Any further questions or comments by members of the committee? Okay, all right. You know, it is what it is. I'm of the opinion that it's better not to approve a budget unless we're confident that the budget, you know, is representative of our needs and is consistent with agency policy. So it's better to delay approving the budget than having to come back and modify it at a later date. So I think as an interim measure, this is appropriate. If we have no further comments by members of the committee, we will move on to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the Operations and Governance Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Any member of the public joining us here today wishing to comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. Maria, anyone joining us virtually?
Madam Chair, we have no hands raised to make public comment.
Okay, thank you. Then I will entertain a motion to recommend the governing board authorize the executive director to approve contracts not to exceed a total of $1 million out of the general fund plus any grant funded contracts prior to the adoption of the FY 2024 budget. You have a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Gabriel. All right, we have a motion. Any comments on the question? All those in, okay, Maria, please take the roll. Trying to expedite things here. Please take the roll.
Mr. Takara.
Aye.
Mr. Honigman.
Yes.
Ms. Dis, Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes,
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
thank you. So that brings us to item number 7, which is upcoming topics.
Yeah, just
Chris.
quickly, we're trying to get onto governing board by 9. Next month, obviously, we'll be doing the budget. That'll be the core of that meeting. We're tentatively thinking about canceling that for August, just because there's the tour on the North Shore and we want to schedule as much time as we can so you get a chance to get around and see things. It's usually a fairly light year. You don't have a whole lot of data points to extrapolate what's going on financially from there. If we have something like a funding release or something like that, we'll bring that. We'll have to schedule at least a short meeting for that. And then just so you all know, because this governance and operations committee is also the audit committee for the board. We had our lead-in meeting with the auditors on Monday. I should have a letter for you shortly. This is the letter that the auditors send out that define the scope of the audit and that their communication to you in terms of what they're doing and how they're doing. The plan is they're doing the interim work now. They'll come back in October to do the final audit work, and then we would target to be here in December to present the audited financial statements to you. August, are we still doing Arlo in August or are we moving that? Okay, probably in September, Arlo will be back with his presentation on planning process improvements. We're not bringing that to the ops committee. I don't think we're even bringing it to ARPIC and go straight to the board. There are a few fee changes in there. For a couple of fee types where he's noticed that there's a substantial differential between the fee that we're charging and the amount of labor that goes into processing the application.
So it's more than just inflation adjustments. It's actually an effort to recover our cost recovery.
On
adjustments.
selected items, it's not going to be a huge revenue swing, but he's just picking off the ones that are most obviously out of whack
Okay,
in terms of what we're charging versus what it costs us to do it.
okay,
Mitigation.
Oh, well, we have a proposal, we like to propose at some point that we start incrementing our mitigation fees as well as planning fees for the inflation adjustment. That's a proposal we'll bring in the future. That's not associated with these other things.
right. But I wanted to distinguish between, since you had inflation adjustments under mitigation
Right.
fees, it's not just an inflation adjustment. It's to bring it in alignment with our costs. These adjustments that you're planning for planning fees.
The planning fee is
Right.
stuff that Arlo is working on. Yeah.
Correct.
It's based on cost. And we're starting a project actually where we're going to start tracking some hours, not in a very detailed way, but trying to do a bit of a, I would call it a time and motion study in the planning area to see where we're really spending the time and just for all the fees. Are the fees properly reflecting the amount of effort that takes to do those? So that'll probably take us a year or two to really work through. That's something Jen Self is working on
Okay.
as part of her
Okay.
support there. That's kind of what's coming up.
Okay,
Sure.
and then I'm assuming, going back a few pages, in your presentation, Chris, with respect to the additional work, the paving work in the parking lot and the reinforcement of the embankment, I'm assuming, are we anticipating being able to stay within the $500,000 that was budgeted for that work?
The parking lot's coming in just about where we expect. It's the question of the retaining wall. The last quote we had from the formal RFP was way out of whack. So we
Right.
went back and said, we're not going to do that. That's not reasonable. So the current effort with the contractor is to squeeze it down into the available funds.
Okay, perfect. All right, great. Okay, any comments or questions by members of the committee on this item? All right, in that case, we will now go to public comment. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Any member of the public wishing to comment on this item? All right, seeing none. Maria, anyone joining us virtually wishing to comment on this item?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to make public comment.
Okay, thank you. Then we will go ahead and close public comment. We are now on agenda number 8, which is committee member comments. And you've been so engaged so far. Any member, any member of the committee wishing to make a comment or ask a question? All right, thank you. Then the final item on the agenda is our final public interest comment period. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this time, at this time, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing * on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Any member of the public wishing to comment on any item not discussed? previously during this meeting? All right, seeing none. Maria, any member of the public wishing to comment virtually?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and close public comment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the government